On August 31st, 2020, during the first day of conditioning, University of the Cumberlands wrestler Grant Brace begged for water. The more Brace begged, a police report says, the more his coaches refused aid. Athletes don't die from heat without warning signs, but the 20-year-old collapsed from exertional heat stroke, a condition experts say is 100% preventable. For 7 months, we dug through records to find out why Grant collapsed. Then we drove to a small town in East Tennessee to meet those who knew him. In the telling of this story, we'll explore what it costs to create champions. This is where two forces meet.
To be a wrestler, you have to enjoy challenging yourself.
Those 7 minutes end up feeling like an hour sometimes.
Where months of preparation face off on the mat.
It's kind of like you're in a car driving and you want to go left and the person in the passenger seat wants to go right, and it's basically you trying to get your opponent to do something that they don't want to do and you want them to do.
Walk your ankle up with your knee, Harold.
Lots of twisting and contact in just about every way that a lot of people aren't used to.
Get your boot in!
You got to be tougher,
Get your boot in!
better conditioned, mentally stronger.
It takes just as much to get good as it takes to stay good.
Where there are two outcomes, those who win and those who learn.
I think that's the great thing about wrestling is because there's an individual aspect to it, you can feel that individual improvement and feel yourself getting better every day. Someone that isn't afraid to work hard and make sacrifices towards their dreams and goals. They're willing to put themselves through some pain and discomfort to make that happen.
Everything either adds up to your goals or subtracts from the possibility of attaining them.
On this Saturday in Bowling Green, at the Mid-South Conference Tournament, Thomas More faces off against other teams in the North Division, like Campbellsville, Midway, Lindsey Wilson, and the University of the Cumberlands. This is where their preparation and their sacrifices determine who will qualify for the NAIA Wrestling National Championships.
To be a wrestler, you have to enjoy challenging yourself too. And so I feel like that's part of it where, you know, you might get put into a bad position sometimes on the mat, but it's like, all right, let's see if I can get out of this one.
Pushing yourself is another side of that mental that is really hard, because a lot of people, as soon as you start to get tired, you're like, it's all right, I can just kind of give up. But when you're out there with 4 more minutes left to wrestle in a close match and you got to dig down deep and figure out how to win, that really brings out the side most people don't see of wrestlers.
There is a wrestler not at the tournament. His name is never announced. His hard work receives no applause. His commissioner doesn't immediately recognize his name. Grant Brace wanted to be a champion. Instead, he's in a casket.
Tough times don't last. You know, that's the big one.
The inspirational words were meant to motivate, written on the last day of August on this dry erase board. Grant Brace was grappling with quitting his college wrestling program during the summer of 2020 when he ran into his high school wrestling coach, Brian Gossett.
Grant walked up and hugged me, you know, and we hadn't talked in a little while at that point, and he said, Coach, he said, I'm not sure if I'm going to go back to wrestling this year. And I said, well, I said, you know what, you're the one that's got to do the work. You're the one that's got to put in the hours. I said, so if that's not what you want to do, then don't do it. And he said, well, I hadn't really made up my mind. And I was like, well, buddy, I was like, you know, you get that degree, that's the most important thing.
He was literally one of the sweetest football players that's ever come to this school. You can see the smile.
Gary Rankin was Grant's high school football coach. Rankin knows how to build champions. He's won 13 state titles at Alcoa, 3 with Grant.
I knew he was going to wrestle. He was a really good wrestler. I knew his football career was over. I knew he'd have a great career doing something, and he would have a successful life because he was that type of kid. I mean, he was a pleaser. He did everything right. He was never in trouble at school or anywhere. So, you knew he was on the path of having a happy and productive life.
When he was your teammate, you were his teammate. And he was loyal to a lot of people that sometimes weren't always nice to him, and he was loyal to some people sometimes that, you know, didn't always give him the same loyalty in return.
Number 99, huge character. We give awards for those guys that aren't the best football player, the ones that didn't score the most points, the ones that didn't get the scholarships. But we give 2 or 3 out for the guys that were the try-hard guys, the guys that were the coach's favorites, those kind of things that you'd want your son to be. And he received one of those awards.
I said, so don't feel like you're letting anybody down. Just understand that, you know, you're the one that's got to go do it. So he kind of let me know a little later that he was going to go back, and I just wished him well. And
he would do anything you asked him to do. He was one of those guys, and I think that I can just see in him whatever they were doing conditioning-wise, he wasn't going to quit.
Tucked in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky, on your way south toward Gatlinburg, is a small private university hugged by the Cumberland River. The last day in August 2020 was the first day of conditioning for the University of the Cumberlands wrestling program. The campus was fairly quiet. Students were learning remotely due to coronavirus. Overnight, rain and clouds brought humidity, and by the afternoon it was still hot and humid. Weather reports show the temperatures were in the mid-80s. The morning following Grant's death, Williamsburg Police Department interviewed more than 40 members of the wrestling team who were at that first day of conditioning. The timeline of events that happened on August 31st of 2020 are all detailed in a report obtained by Local 12 Investigates. That report is written by Williamsburg Police Chief Wayne Byrd. This is what the report says happened. Practice began with weightlifting and drills for short-range hand-to-hand combat, known in wrestling as hand fighting. Then the team went to the track at the university's football stadium to run sprints. Grant's teammates told officers that they were allowed to take a water bottle out to the track, but the coaching staff told them to throw their water bottles on the fence and not touch them. The report doesn't say whether they were allowed to drink at any point from the water bottles. After finishing up at the track, the team ran from Taylor Stadium along 2nd Street, then about a mile to School Street, and that's where there's a grass hill right outside the Luker building. That's the building that houses the team's wrestling facility. That hill, measured by police, is approximately 200 feet in length on a 30 to 40% incline. It's known around the wrestling program as Punishment Hill. Teammates said they again had water bottles and again were told to leave them on the hill and not touch them. The team began to run sprints up Punishment Hill because, court documents say, a teammate didn't complete his fundraising requirement. For the first 7 sprints, officers were told Grant did well. Then he began to show signs of fatigue. Grant Brace grew up on wrestling and weightlifting. He loved to work hard. Following his freshman year, his family transferred to Alcoa from a nearby school because of his dad's job.
So I remember the first day they came in here. I remember the mom, dad, the very first day they came in and toured our school. Just sweet people, good family.
That one there is 2017. Down here's 2018 when he was a senior.
Brian Gossett remembers all the conversations and texts he had with Grant's mom because of her son's medical condition. Grant suffered from narcolepsy, and he was prescribed Adderall.
He was also a big-time self-advocate. He was somebody that would advocate for himself in all situations.
Grant's mom would text Gossett to check up on how Grant seemed if it was after a day she knew he didn't sleep well.
Now wrestling on mat number 11 from Alcoa, your Region 2 champion, 2-time medalist, Grant Brace. Brace now wrestling on mat.
He would work himself until he couldn't go anymore, and then he'd water up and get himself situated, and then he'd work till he couldn't work anymore.
Because of his condition, when Grant went to college, the officers were told that Grant's parents said he received a medical exemption, that he could have access to water anytime he wanted it. The NAIA is a college governing body similar to the NCAA, but for small colleges and universities. Adderall is a stimulant, which is a substance the NAIA bans unless you have an exemption from a doctor, which Brace had, according to court documents. The interactions between stimulants and an athlete's training came to the forefront of sports medicine in 2018. That's when Maryland football player Jordan McNair died from overheating. The investigation into his death revealed McNair took prescription Vyvanse, a stimulant for ADHD. That investigation revealed the stimulant increased the risk of McNair suffering from exertional heat stroke, something his team and medical staff and coaches should have identified as risk factors.
So one of our biggest questions was, how do we go from a healthy child Tuesday morning to an emergency liver transplant Friday morning, with 85% of his liver being dead?
Aaron Himmler has been a collegiate athletic trainer for 9 years. In that time, he's had a couple of athletes suffer from heat stroke.
There is a known link between ADD medication and hyperthermia. It's a stimulant, just like caffeine is, and stimulants increase your body temperature, increase your heart rate.
He said an athletic trainer asks about any prescriptions an athlete may be on before he competes.
A stimulant is basically like putting a higher octane fuel in your gas tank, and as your engine performs, it can perform basically at a higher higher performance level. There can be reasons where it's beneficial for your heart to be beating faster, so you can move oxygen to the parts of your body that you need it to. It also can be detrimental if you're essentially redlining that engine for too long, basically too long of a period of time. Too much gas for too long is not great. And just like your engine, it can overheat, so can your body and so can your heart and your internal organs.
The police report says Grant was supposed to be permitted extra water breaks during practice because the Adderall often caused his mouth to be dry. The report doesn't state whether he received any extra water breaks the day he died. The following events are all from that report. As Grant's fatigue from the sprint set in, he sat and laid down. The coaches became irritated with his performance and told him, as they put it, to leave the hill and clean out his locker. Grant left, but returned a couple of minutes later, saying he wanted to prove himself to the coaches and team. Chief Byrd wrote, "Some witnesses describe a lot of verbal abuse by the coaches and even teammates as Grant continued to attempt sprints up the hill. Witnesses describe hearing Grant say at the time, 'Help me, I can't stand,' and then appearing to be very unsteady on his feet." Chief Byrd went on, witnesses describe a short team meeting on the hill after the sprints when Grant was holding on to a small tree limb, swaying back and forth, saying, "I can't stand." Witnesses also described 2 other teammates who went down on the hill that day, vomiting and showing signs of distress. Those team members were attended to by a trainer. The report doesn't indicate whether the athletic trainer attended to Grant. After leaving the hill, the team went to the wrestling room, which is about 100 yards from the hill, to cool down and shower. After the practice, Brace allegedly laid on a wrestling mat in the wrestling room and began to beg for water. This is what the police report says happened next. At one point, witnesses state Grant opened a cooler full of ice that was provided by the trainer and began to immerse himself in the ice and began splashing ice on his body. The report does not say whether he tried to ingest any ice. Witnesses state at times Grant would say, "Guys, I need water. Get me some water." And at one point, some witnesses hear Grant state his pupils were twitching and he couldn't see. One witness attempted to wrap ice in a towel and place it on Grant when he was stopped by the coach because Grant didn't perform well on the hill. The law enforcement report says Grant then began to speak in gibberish. Then Grant charged a teammate, tackling him to the ground. At that point, witnesses described Grant running out of the gym, Chief Byrd wrote. Officers would later review security footage of Grant as he left the wrestling gym. The report says he ran to a nearby building and attempted to pull open a locked door. When he could not get the door open, he kicked the door and ran off out of the view of the camera. In the video, Grant appeared to be in panic, or what the chief would describe as fight or flight.
Usually with heat stroke, individuals have lost consciousness, and again, you can pick them out. You will start to see them, they will lose their ability to continue an activity, they'll be lethargic, They'll have an inability to communicate.
There are 4 categories of distress heat: heat cramps, heat illness, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke.
And that's the granddaddy of them all. Heat stroke is where your core temperature elevates above 104 degrees. And here it is critical to cool the body down, because in that elevated temperature state, the amount of time that you can survive is limited.
At a health and safety conference in Illinois, Bud Cooper discussed heat acclimatization, or the period it takes an athlete's body to adjust to increased activity in heat. Cooper has spent his career researching how environmental conditions impact the risk of an athlete overheating, what is known as exertional heat illness.
What the data shows is that, yes, there needs to be a restriction of participation time during acclimatization in order for them to allow their thermoregulatory system to adjust to the environmental conditions with which they're going to be practicing in.
Those first 7 to 10 days, I think, is where us as a staff are trying to stay really very locked into what's going on, how the kids are looking, how they're responding, using some of the information that we have, whether it's, ambient temperature, on-field temperature, those things, just trying to get a holistic view of what is going on.
You don't have to have heat exhaustion first and then lapse into heat stroke. You could go, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, boom, heat stroke.
Grant wouldn't be seen again for nearly 2 hours.
911. Hey, I got an emergency at the University of Cumberlands. I'm right in front of Grace Crum Volunteer Center. I got a student. We found passed out. I don't know what's wrong with him. In front of Grace Crum, he's not moving right now.
The Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office ruled the brace died of exertional heat stroke. The Whitley County Commonwealth Attorney said the case is still ongoing. The Williamsburg Police Department said the case is still an active, open investigation. Court documents claim the wrestling coaches created a toxic culture in the program. And a third witness later filed civil litigation against the university after he suffered a brain injury as a result of a concussion incurred during a practice on Punishment Hill. The NAIA never did an investigation, neither did the Mid-South Conference. The NAIA and Mid-South Conference do have policies related to heat and humidity, but they only apply to NAIA or Mid-South Conference specific events like championships or intra-conference matches.
We practice institutional autonomy as much as we possibly can.
Local 12 investigators drove to Bowling Green for the conference tournament. Before we started our camera, Mid-South Conference Commissioner Eric Ward told us the reason he doesn't like having guidelines or protocols related to health and safety of the conference athletes is because he doesn't like guidelines with no oversight.
Medical situations that occur on campuses, we've not, in my 20 years around the conference has never inserted itself.
So then who would you say is in charge of protecting the health and safety of the athletes of the conference?
I would say it's the presidents and the athletic directors and the head athletic trainers at each member institution. It's their primary responsibility to oversee the health and safety, particularly when it involves practicing, conditioning, training, those kinds of things.
Is he breathing? No, I don't think so.
We requested an interview or comment from the president and athletic director of the University of the Cumberlands. We are still waiting the school's response. The Grace Crum Rollins Center is across the street from the campus wrestling building. The center is one of 3 buildings that faces the only fountain on campus. It was not working at the time and had no water in it. When Grant was found, 2 hours after he was last seen, he was just yards from that fountain, clutching the grass. It appeared he had vomited. The joints and muscles of his body had already begun to stiffen.
It's almost unimaginable to me. For him to die alone is the part that I just can't come to grips with. That he struggled in the last, minutes of his life for just somebody to help him. That's the part that I just can't get over. And it's just unimaginable to me that somebody would just let him die without helping him.
Grant would have graduated college in May. His high school wrestling coach remembers being excited about how Grant's life might unfold, about what he would learn at the University of the Cumberlands, and how wrestling would continue to teach him resilience. All that, of course, is gone. He told us he wonders what would have happened if he had encouraged Grant to not continue wrestling in college. He figured someday he would wear a coat and tie to Grant's wedding. Instead, he wore it to be a pallbearer at his funeral. Grant's college wrestling career could have been a celebration of his tenacity on the mat. Instead, it ended in a wrongful death lawsuit that's still ongoing. I'm Gary Miller, Local 12 News.
Crappy technique right there.